Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again very much for coming. Last round. So at SAR, it's a very long-standing tradition in the way in which kind of the support for the United Israel is ma'asi and not just theoretical. Rabbi Full, followed by Rabbi Schwad, followed by Rabbi Full, followed by Rabbi Cohen, have set a very kind of set the gold standard of what it means to be an educator in America, which is that you give to the community in the United States, and then you settle in Israel and fulfill the responsibility of participating with the Am Yisrael of the United Israel. So, given the topic of Israel diaspora that we've been discussing, it's a pleasure to ask Rabbi Cohen, who's now living in Israel for
year number 11.
11 years, to share some of his thoughts on the topic. It's an honor to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Harcsztark, for allowing me just a couple of minutes. With what Ariel Sharon famously said, and when he did a flip-flop in one of his policies, he said, "Masharim nipo lorim nisham." What you see from one place, you don't necessarily see from another place. And those of you that are a little bit of a sports fan, the game from the third baseline looks different than the game from the first baseline. And certainly understanding Zionism, Israel, the diaspora, is a very different experience living in the United States and understanding it, and living here in Israel and living it and understanding it. And you know, when it really came, the first year, I'll never forget this, the litmus test, and when you think about it, it's pretty ridiculous, but the litmus test for Zionism and the educational community in New York City is, does your school march in the parade? The Salute to Israel parade becomes the, oh, did you march in the parade? This school did march, this school didn't march, this rabbi came, this rabbi didn't come, and that becomes the litmus test to see how much of a Zionist you really are. And then I got here to Israel the first year, and it came time for the parade. No one had ever heard of the parade here. It's just such a non-entity. No one knows that it happens. Maybe in the Jerusalem Post there's a little picture that says it was the Salute to Israel parade, and it's such a non-news event, and it just sort of like just resonated. I know Rabbi Harcsztark uses that word a lot, resonate, and it just resonated with me how different people understand Zionism here, what it means to be a Zionist, as opposed to the very positive flag-waving parade, the Salute to Israel parade, which I absolutely felt and still feel is an important event on the New York calendar for the various schools. We are in an era of post-Zionism. Just happened this morning. I do teach high school here in Israel. I teach kids who are English speakers, not necessarily were they born and raised in America, but they are English speakers. And I made mention of Kristallnacht today in school, and they looked at me, this particular group, they never heard of Kristallnacht. It was, oh, what's that? November broken glass. Oh yeah, something or whatever. We are 70 years after the liberation of the camps, is what we're commemorating this year in 2015. And therefore, after 70 years, we know that the lifespan of a human being, as said by David HaMelech, is 70 shana, is 70 years. And when 70 years passes, it's a new, not just a new generation, it's a new era. And this idea of Zionism being the creation of a safe haven for Jews is really something very much which belongs to the past, and in my opinion, does not belong to the present at all. And it totally changes the way we look at Israel and the way we look at Zionism. Prime Minister Netanyahu invokes the Shoah all the time. And l'ta'ati, that is a tremendous mistake. The Shoah, again, for better or for worse, is becoming history, is no longer current events. to our lives was current events. If it didn't live through it, we knew people, we knew survivors, our parents, our grandparents, our community members who were survivors, very, very much a part of our lives. To our children's lives, and certainly to our grandchildren's lives, it's not nearly the same part of the life that it was and that it is to us. And if the old line of Zionism, whether it be the Herzl Zionism, or whether it be the post-Hakamat Hamdina Zionism, is that all Jews need a safe haven, and here this is the safe haven where a Jew can practice the religion and can be a Jew freely. It doesn't mean very much anymore. Oh yes, France this year, after the massacre in Paris, which is talking about the Parisian Jewry, all of a sudden, again, Prime Minister Netanyahu said it out loud, oh, this is the safe haven. I don't buy it. I don't think it's the way anymore that what Zionism really is today or can be today. And one of the major reasons that L'Da'ati we are losing a large swath of the Jewish community, their connection to Israel, is because they don't need Israel. The United States Jew, religious or not religious, does not need Israel to be the place where we can safely practice the religion. Riverdale is fine, Teaneck is great, White Plains, it's all good. And you don't need Israel anymore to fill that particular role. I don't know if you saw the Rabbi Harcsztark, David Sable's article?
No, I didn't.
Kedai. David Sable, who is I don't think, maybe still a board member, I don't know, former parent of SAR. He's also the chairman of the CEO of Young and Rubicam, the largest advertising firm in the world, and he's a proud Zionist. And he wrote recently in Haaretz just about this idea of rebranding Israel. You can no longer, the brand of Israel is not, oh, Holocaust survivors and people, persecuted people, please come to our shores because you're coming to the Zionist state in a place where you're going to be safe. That is something that belonged to the 40s, 50s, maybe the 60s. There are some people that still preach it today and still believe, oh yes, another Holocaust is around the corner. Certainly, I don't see it like that whatsoever. And I think that it is a major mistake in the branding of Zionism and in the education of Zionism of seeing Israel in that light. But much rather, Israel and with the Zionism that you feel here, especially in the what's called the Dati Leumi community here, the religious Zionist community here, is the Zionism of Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, something very, very different. That this is not the Zionism of a safe haven, but rather it's the building of a future for Klal Yisrael. This is the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. So the Zionism of today takes on much more a religious tone, even for those people who may not be religious, but takes on a much more religious tone that I think that it certainly did in the pre-state and even in the beginning of the post-state era. And hence, it presents major challenges. Is that how do we infuse our youth of today with this feeling of tzionut, that this is really the reshit tzmichat geulatenu, that this is the beginning. It's not that you have to run away from something, which is what the original Zionism was, but rather run to something, because I am seeking something and not that I'm running away from something. Very interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I ran into a former student of ours, Ariella Dezik. I'm sure Rabbi Harcsztark can remember her. She lives here in Modi'in, and she started to talk to me. She said, Rabbi Cohen, I want you to know, the reason why I made Aliyah, because it was in 6th grade. Somebody was teaching me about, I shouldn't remember who the teacher was about Bayit Sheni, and how the people did not come back for Bayit Sheni, and they stayed in Bavel. And I said then and there, I am not going to be one of those people. And that's why I am here, because the 6th grade in SAR, that's why I have made my home in Israel today. And how do we go ahead and educationally really package this and understand this? I think one of the major things is Ivrit. is the study of Hebrew language. One of the things that I see over and over here is that American children come to Israel and they feel they don't belong because they don't speak the language. They've studied Hebrew in school and even in SAR through 12 years, and they come to Israel and they do not feel comfortable within the language. They cannot listen to the radio and understand the broadcast. They cannot read a newspaper and understand the goings on from an Israeli perspective. I think one of the major things that unfortunately we have jettisoned in our education, if not completely, then we have made major compromises, is in this ideal of the Ivrit, of making our kids feel comfortable with the modern Israel and being part of this movement. Another thing that comes to mind when it comes to education is, and I saw this, and I tried when I was in SAR in the elementary school to try to bring this, at least the beginnings of this. Can we create within our children the feeling of dual citizenship? It is very important that they feel staunchly American. I have very deep roots in America. I love America. I am a fourth generation American. My family sought a safe haven in America. In 1850, they were already in Richmond, Virginia. And we lost the Civil War, migrated northward to Baltimore. And throughout my family were Shomer Shabbat Jews. And so I have tremendous debt of gratitude to America, which we want our children to feel as well as being good and staunch American citizens. But yet we should also try, l'da'ati, is to let them feel this idea of being Israeli citizens even when they're in America, to feel part of this Rishit Smichat Gulatena. This goes from that they should be able to identify cities on an Israeli map the same way they know where New York, Miami, and California is. They should know where Tveria, Tzfat, and Dimona and Eilat and Tel Aviv are on an Israeli map and feel comfortable with it. And when there's discussion of the West Bank and things of that nature, that they have a very clear understanding of the Israeli map. Do they know more about American history than they do about Israeli history? Do they feel more connected to Thanksgiving than they do to Yom Ha'atzmaut or to other Israeli holidays? Can we go ahead and create this feeling of dual citizenship? When it came to the elections in Israel, I know that we tried very hard at elementary school, that the same way we would have a mock vote for the American presidential elections, which is very important, and to discuss the issues, the same should be done in terms of the Israeli elections. And they should know who the candidates are, how the parties work, and feel very, very much part of that. Part of that scene. I'm getting notices here that our meeting time is 2 minutes and 35 seconds. They're just going to shut down. Yeah. So they're putting you on a leash here.
We didn't mean to do that.
I'm sorry?
That was not intentional. I'm not exactly sure.
I know.
That.
But just speaking a little bit, Rav Lichtenstein recently was written up by Rabbi Rothstein, Rothstein. Once he was at one of Rav Lichtenstein's Zatzal's give and take sessions. We used to call the press conferences, where Talmidim could ask Rav Lichtenstein a variety of questions. And the question of living in Eretz Yisrael came up. He said he didn't want to discuss the halacha aspect of it. What we said was following the quote. But the future of the Jewish people is here. Why wouldn't someone come if they had the opportunity? And this is really what's very, very important, I think, in this post-Zionist era, to recognize that this is the Reshit Smichat Gulatenu. This is the future, the future of the Jewish people, and the history of the Jewish people is being written here in Israel, and not in Teaneck, and not in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and not in Riverdale. There are mighty contributions that Chutz La'aretz makes. Mighty contributions that diaspora Judaism makes, and also to the maintenance and good standing of the land of Israel. But in the world today, when people ask, if you would ask someone randomly, about the Jews, they would point to Israel, because this is the Jewish state. This is a representative of Israel, of Judaism to the world at large. Just in closing very, very briefly, I have less than 1 minute. There is a nevuah, of course, in Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, of the Shivat Zion, of coming back. And I think the Salvation taught, as well as others, that we must be proactive. The part of the nevuah is not to sit back and wait for it to happen, but rather to be very, very much a part of that process. And I'm very proud to say that living here in Israel gives me and the people that are my neighbors that chance to be part of the process of the great nevuah, Rishis Michat Geulatenu. Thank you very, very much. I hope I added to the discussion and presented some food for fodder. And I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the rush there at the end. There it is. Okay. Hi. I don't know exactly the question that I want to ask, but I'm curious as to what you. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't want to. I mean, I'm going to guess that they're different. I gave away mine actually. I just need one more. Sets, please. I don't know if were these stapled together.
They're not stapled.
They should be.
There were 2 sheets. There were 2 sheets, but they're not stapled. Some of them are.
Can we try to get it back?
What?
Can I get it back?
No,
Yeah, these are stapled. Some
I
of them
email
are. Some
afterwards.
of them
Any thoughts?
So I'll say I like what he said a lot. I don't agree with his feeling of trying to not, in a marketing way, when you position Israel as not a place, not bringing up the Shoah constantly. I feel that would be a huge loss. Because
Not
Israel-
being what? I'm sorry.
Bringing up the
bringing up
Shoah.
the Shoah.
Oh.
I think part of Israel's charm is that it is a refuge. It has a lot of Holocaust survivors, and it would be a shame to. It doesn't bother me that Netanyahu brings it up a lot. So that's my personal.
Okay, thank you. I'll just comment, just a couple of comments. One after. I'm not even gonna. Yeah.
I think one of the most important things he said about the Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu is that we've been overtaken by events on the ground in terms of now Israel is the demographic center of the Jewish people. There are more Jews in Israel than in America or in the former Soviet Union or any of the other countries where you had large Jewish populations. But we've kind of passed the tipping point, and maybe in the future we'll view ourselves, even here in Galut, as Israeli people as opposed to even Jewish people. Maybe Israeli will be our main identity as more and more things originate from Israel in terms of, you see it in the Rabbanut, they're trying to take control of all, of conversions worldwide, not just.
Well, that's
So
a
there
part
are
of
problems
what I
in
want
it,
to
yeah.
talk. Yeah, I mean that's a little bit of the angle that I want to kind of push towards now. Something connected. Should we become more? Should the diaspora? Well, I don't know. Were there one or two more others things people wanted to say? Yeah.
I liked and I agree with how he said that Israel doesn't need to be a safe haven for Jews anymore, because Jews are safer in the world, but it seems like Israel's becoming a safe haven for other peoples now, which is kind of interesting, and it makes it less Jewish in population and flavor, but kind of more Jewish in character that they're providing that safe haven.
Mm-hmm. What is that? What's the diaspora then? In either of these what is that? I mean, I don't know really how to ask the question exactly, but what's the? Should we all not be here?
No, I mean,
Yeah.
My question would be, what suddenly brought this on? Why was this such a? It was very passionate plea. And the question is, Israel's been here since 1947. It's been here a long time. Why suddenly is this issue coming up?
At all?
Yeah.
Like, why am I focused on?
No, that is, but it's passionate.
Well, the background on that is really as simple as we sent out an email. It says that I'm going to be talking about Israel and diaspora. And Rabbi Cohen sent an email and said I would be honored to have 15 minutes to share a perspective from here. And what I think is it's super valuable to hear the message, and it's also super valuable to give it thought, like to think about it. What does it mean? We hear that message all the time. I find myself very interested in the diaspora part of the question, what it means. And how to kind of maintain an interest in thinking about the diaspora while still being a strong Zionist and not being a weaker Zionist, because I'm thinking about the diaspora. So I feel like it's. I think a little bit of the agenda here is also to say Masherim Mipol or Im Misham cuts in two directions, and what's the meaning of that? Is there an assumption, or should there be an assumption on the part of Israelis that there is a life in the diaspora that they don't know about and don't pay any attention to, and that they're real Jews here who maybe they should also get to know and learn about a little bit more than they do? I am.
They know. There are tens of thousands of Israelis live outside of Israel. So.
Right, but we know that's. I mean, I get the comment part of that, but that doesn't mean that the people in Israel know, right? I mean, it's a different, a little bit of a different thing.
Well, it also goes a third way. There's another thing that I think he's there and he doesn't see, where he says it's very comfortable to be Jewish in Riverdale and White Plains and Teaneck, and so this is a place that people should go to and not run away from somewhere else. It's not so comfortable for Jews to be Jews in France today, and so some people are running away and some people are not. Like my family, they're not running away because they don't feel the need to. They're comfortable. So that's also something that I'm not sure. When he says this, I'm not sure he realizes the whole picture.
I think there's a difference in the diaspora in America than there is in the whole rest of the world. Because we don't have the need to run, and I think most Americans who make Aliyah, it's a religious Aliyah. You look at Nefesh B'Nefesh, those are mostly Orthodox people. In the rest of the world, they're running away from anti-Semitism. In America, there is not significant anti-Semitism, which is a problem. That's why there's so much intermarriage here, because we're so well received, so accepted in this country. We're not made to feel uncomfortable.
Right.
You know, it's almost a status symbol here to marry a Jew.
So, yes.
You know, in the rest of the world, my father, of blessed memory, always used to say every time he heard someone married a non-Jew in this country, he'd say, what we need in this country is a little anti-Semitism.
Yeah, right. One more and then let's shift gears. Yeah.
What he is saying is every morning in the Amidah, you say, Kaba Shofar, Gadol L'Chayritenu, V'Beitz Guluyotenu. He says the time has come to put your money where your mouth is. In other words, it's time for kibbutz galiyot. There is a place, and it's your obligation after mouthing this all these years that you should be here, because it's the beginning of the redemption, whatever that means. So that's where Rabbi Cohen is coming from, and it's a point of view, it's well held, and it's the question is, can you make a good defense for the validity of the diaspora, which I happen to agree with you on, and the validity of Bavel and the Talmud and everything that happened to the Jews in the diaspora. So, you know, maybe in Israel they ought to have a Kaba Shofar to tout America and what you've done here.
Yeah, well, I can't. I mean, I feel like my I cannot help my guilt feelings like kind of taken over. I don't know. When I'm it's a complicated. If I had to kind of synopsize a little bit of where, if I would bring where I'm a little bit of where I'm coming from and bring it all together, I'd say that there are three different kinds of narratives that exist. Rabbi Cohen mentioned two of them, and I've been trying to push a little bit of a third. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, and I think that for the sake of being able to be a thoughtful person, being able to
consider all three of them and play them off each other and read our situation in light of them is very helpful. The three, kind of classically, and this, just to give a drop of background, in addition to hearing Rabbi Cohen talk about it, the Hartman Institute in North America has put together a curriculum for rabbis, which is used in lots of, in all, around the country in all denominations of shuls, called I Engage. And in the introduction, I actually had a piece of it in today's thing, and then I took it out, and I didn't leave it in, but it's actually, as it turns out, quite relevant. They say that the classic narrative, the classic Zionist narrative, is a crisis narrative. As Rabbi Cohen described, the crisis narrative is Zionism grew out of the failed hope in the Enlightenment and the emancipation that was going to provide Jews with a place to be able to live safely. And then the pogroms in 1881 basically showed that that wasn't true, and Zionism grew out of that. And the idea of a crisis narrative is, where are Jews going to live if they're not going to live in their own land? Because wherever else they live, something terrible happens. And that is kind of the narrative. And there seems to be pretty widespread agreement that that narrative, while it has, you can never forget it. I think Jews would be very, it would be very odd for Jews looking at their history to just forget the crisis narrative. And so I don't think that we should just dump it. But it is for sure true that it doesn't speak to people in the same way, especially if you're living in the United States of America. And even if it is not easy in other places or even some places here, it's not the same as what we imagine. The question is, what's the narrative that takes its place? And there's one narrative that takes its place that's a religious Zionist narrative, which has a messianic component to it, and that is, on the one hand, inspiring and powerful and has dramatically changed the world. And I'll say that, on the other hand, has some dangerous components to it also. And I have kind of feelings about messianic dreams in the ways in which those things play out. But that is, for sure, it can be an intense messianism, it can be a softer messianism. There are different ways in which you can cut it, but it's on the assumption that that is pushing in a certain kind of direction. There is.
It's a religious name.
It's
Isn't that a religious name?
That's interesting about. Well, I think part of what made it's interesting whether that's the only formulation of a religious narrative, is whether kind of that messianic piece to it, because I think it would also be a religious narrative. And what Hartman tries to push for is what they call a values narrative, meaning what you have in Israel is the possibility for the first time in a very long time for Jews to be able to live out the values of what it means to be Jews living the ethics of Torah in a real society, which is different than and this is classic David Hartman. As David Hartman said, the idea of having a state is not so much that it's going to lead to a third. It can lead to a third temple, or it can lead to maybe a different point of focus is they can lead to a society that's rooted in caring for the Ger Yatom V'Almana and a society of Shabbos and Chagim and Jewish life and all of that. And it's a values kind of narrative. Does it make sense, or can it resonate? As Rabbi Cohen said, I like to say that those are the difference in a crisis narrative, a religious messianic narrative, and a values-based kind of narrative. Can you get the vibe of a difference between that? What's the difference? What would be a difference in terms of decision making if you're thinking in terms of a messianic narrative or a values-based narrative?
You wouldn't disregard the other in a values-based narrative in light of messianic.
So that's actually a really super important example, right? In a values-based narrative, you cannot disregard the other. Who's the other? Lots of different possibilities of others. The other can be the non-observant person. The other can be a different nation, another religion. That's an other. Now, I could ask you for other examples, but the truth is that's probably the example that most directly points to that distinction, between going one way and going another way. And that's actually very important. What's the narrative? Which narrative is it that you think we're supposed to be taking on now? And if there was, it's like, what does all that have to do with Israel and diaspora, though, necessarily? I actually think that the way that you think about that makes a difference in terms of how you consider Israel and diaspora. And I'm going to go back to the end of last week, which we rushed through for a second, and then see how we can I don't know, maybe push forward a little bit today with this. The argument from last week was as follows. There were a whole group of Zionists we tried to point to last week. There were a group of American, but not only American, there were a group of Zionists, and Mordechai Kaplan was in that group, and Shimon Ravidovich was in that group, who believed that the idea of Jews living in a society, the thing that they could give more than anything else was recognizing the rights of the other and the minorities within their society, and that's what they assumed that Zionism was supposed to lead to. And that raised real questions for them about the role of sovereignty, how to think about sovereignty, what are the possible things that sovereignty in a state could, what are the complications that could cause. And the reason why that was important in terms of the Israel diaspora conversation, and you'll please ask me clarifying questions after I finish this paragraph, see if what I'm saying is clear, is that the argument was that the idea of collective minorities having rights in a society under someone else's sovereignty is an argument that Jews made as a collective here in the United States, and actually had a meaningful impact on the way in which democracy played itself out in the United States, and that there is a reason why the United States is different than Europe in this regard, because, and they're not crediting the Jews with change in the United States, just like the Jews made that happen, but that is part of the Jewish voice, which is recognizing in reality, if you got to push for the rights of the other in that kind of society. The argument that I was trying to put forward last week is that if you look at kind of the idea of the nation state and nationalities without a state, and think about Israel and diaspora, there's a way of thinking about Israel and diaspora, Jewish communities, as allowing for a certain kind of binocular vision about what it means to have an ethical society that treats everyone as properly as possible. I call it binocular because if you're the one in power, you forget about the one who's not in power, and if you're the one who's not in power, you hate the one who's in power. And if there's anything that Jewish history has kind of taught us, is that kind of binary between the people who are in power and the people who are not in power. So the argument would be on this kind of broad ideological, kind of learning texts way, but maybe also in terms of political theory. So I'm just going to review the first three classes like in the next paragraph, which is like this. We always, in the narrative of Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the assumption is that diaspora is, or not, the classic Zionist narrative, say it like that. The assumption is diaspora is bad and Israel is good, which means everybody's supposed to leave and go. The first class was dedicated to trying to sort out the positive aspects of diaspora existence for Jewish history and for Jewish culture and the ways in which that's made us who we are today. The second class was to point out that historically, it's a striking story that Rabbi Cohen told, that the sixth grader said, I'm not going to be, right, it's Ezra Nehemiah, I'm going to be the people, I'm going to be that person. And when I talked about my own guilt, it's like, do I actually really want to champion the fact that there's also Daniel, there's also Esther that, posited something else. But the reality is there were Jews in Israel and there were Jews out of Israel. There were Jews in Eretz Yisrael and there were Jews in Bavel. Those two communities actually lived side by side. And the question is whether there's something to that. And so from a political theory argument, what strikes me over and over is that there's something to having both of those in a way in which they enrich and mutually support each other in terms of kind of tempering, we need the sovereignty, we need to remember what it is to be a minority. Is it possible that what Judaism brings to the table is how to be a sovereign by virtue of remembering what it is to be a minority, and maybe holding on to both of those things together allows for a certain thing to be able to happen, in which is going to then lead to the fourth thing, which is how do Israel and diaspora, how does that kind of idea shape the idea of Jewish peoplehood? What does it mean to be, and this goes to your comment before, is the idea that everybody should be Israel. We're Jews, we're not Israelis. There is people in Israel are Israelis, people here are Jews. So what's the Jewish nation? Well, the Jewish religion are Jews all over the place, but what's the Jewish nation? And how does Israel and diaspora fit into that?
Difference between a nation and a state.
And is there, along that, is there a difference between a nation and a state in that regard? Is the Jewish nation everything? Is the Jewish nation the Jewish state? If the Jewish nation is the Jewish state, then those are the people who live in Israel. So we know that there is the state, and there's the nation, and there's the religion. So you could cut that, well, right, and where do the people fit into, as you could cut it as in Israel, that's the nation state, and the religion is in Chutz La'aretz. The Reform movement in 1885 in the Pittsburgh platform said that beferish. They said, we living here, we no longer have Messianic, they tempered it in 1937. But in 1885 they said, we no longer believe in the Messianic idea. Judaism is no longer a nation, Judaism is a religion. And that's what, and they understand, meaning, do you feel kind of the significant, what's being articulated in that? Meaning, so what did the Zionists say? I mean, the Zionists and the Reform are very clear on this. What do the Zionists say?
There's no need for the religion.
Well, yeah, that's, I mean, you went a step further even than I want to, yeah, but you're right. I was just wanted to go the other. They basically picked the other two and said, there is a Jewish nation and it has to live in a Jewish state. There's a Jewish nation that lives in a Jewish state. What's getting bounced, what's not, what's a possible argument is to just note that there are three things. There's the Jewish state, and there's a Jewish nation, and there's a Jewish religion, and you gotta kind of get, for educational purposes, without making a claim as to which I like the best, right? And I like one of them the best, but as far as this is a learning opportunity, that's what we're really doing here. We're not talking about political statements or religious statements. The idea is those can be put together in different kinds of ways, and you're making very different arguments about what you think Judaism is. So all of what we've done so far, I want to make sure we're on the same page. Right now, the question on the table is about Jewish peoplehood. Peoplehood over the past 10, 12, 15 years has become like in the world of people who talk about that. I didn't know that was a big word until I started paying attention to it. Then I started paying attention to the people who are talking about it. Peoplehood is a big term. What's the thing about peoplehood? Like when you say, what about the people? That's like, well, it means like thinking about, okay, the ideologies, whatever. There are Jews in lots of different places. So whose responsibility is it? What's the responsibility to think about Jewish peoplehood? Like everybody, and what's the relationship supposed to be? So, okay, I'm actually going to ask I want to read a little bit, just clarifying things. And what is making sense so far, or are there clarifying things to make sure that I'm being clear? Okay, I guess that's okay, all right. I'm going to start on page 1 towards the bottom. A.B. Yoshua is very famous in this regard. Starting with the second source rather than the first. That's the second part of the page. I didn't mark them more. From the A.B. Yoshua controversy is supposed to be the second source. I didn't number them. So in 2006, A.B. Yoshua was invited to Washington, D.C. For a centennial celebration of the American Jewish Committee. The American Jewish Committee opened in 1906, and 2006 I was there. So there was a panel. It's like quote. I can't remember. It's like A.B. Yoshua. I remember the A.B. Yoshua was on the panel, and Cynthia Osuk was on the panel, and am I making it up? Leon Wieseltier was on the panel, maybe, and Ted Koppel was the moderator. It's like, and A.B. Yoshua got up, and he was the American Jewish Committee, right? That's the, and he basically slammed the Diaspora, as he is famous for doing. He's done multiple times, and I just picked some of the kind of famous quotes where he says, "I will not have and cannot keep my identity outside of Israel. Being Israeli is my skin; it's not my jacket." That's that's like if there's a takeaway line for everything he said, that's the line. So when you're living in the Diaspora, your Judaism is your jacket. You can, you're an American and you're wearing a Jewish jacket. You're French and you're wearing a Jewish jacket. He said, when I leave Israel, I'm outside, I can't take my identity with me. You are changing jackets. From Argentina, you take a jacket to Brazil, from Brazil to America. You're changing countries like the Jews have done all the time. Changing countries like changing jackets.
Yeah, I don't think you characterized what he said fairly when you said that our Judaism is our jacket. I'm not sure that you would agree with that claim. It seems, at least from the first paragraph,
The Americans is a jacket. I mean,
yeah, my nationality is the jacket. My Judaism is my skin.
yeah, you're right. I just, it just makes you have to explain the, I think it makes the metaphor. Well, what do you think he's saying? You're right. I mean, that's that question. Let's read on further and tell me whether the metaphor just isn't sharp enough or whether he's actually meaning something else. I have my skin, the territory, the smell of the territory, the smell of the language. All of this is my identity. Whatever religion is inside this or is not inside, maybe that's what he means. To play all the time with the pathological interaction with the anti-Semite, what he thinks about you, what he speaks about you, this is not my game. I have to say to you, I very welcome your dual loyalty, but I don't get it. I would like that you would have one loyalty in Israel and participate. The fact that Israel is on your mind does not help me. You're living with all your loyal feelings to Israel, but you're a living myth about Israel and not the history of Israel. That caused an enormous controversy because you can imagine 100 years of AJC and they gather in Washington for a thing and he gets up and basically slams what the AJC has been about for 100 years.
Know who you're inviting.
What?
Know who you're inviting.
Yeah, well, that's what he said, his response. So first of all, just a little, I mean, there was an outpouring. I mean, it was apparently like a terrible, terribly uncomfortable scene, and lots of people wrote back, wrote about it. It was op-eds all over the place. The AJC, it's free online if you want to look at it, but they basically put together a pamphlet of like 90 pages of all the people who responded to Abi Yoshua on one side or another, and he writes a forward to the thing saying, kind of like, I'm sorry for upsetting people, but it's not the first time that I said that, so I don't know what everybody's so upset about. And that's so it's like you should have known who you were inviting. You should have known who you were inviting. But okay, all that, like this, the voyeuristic side of like knowing the story and watching all okay, that's great. But what's he actually saying? He's actually saying something that's very significant. Very, very. This is kind of classic Zionist ideology. In a certain sense, it's basically classic Zionist ideology, which is that you can't like what it means to be a Jew is to be in Israel. If you're not in Israel, you're that's not the real thing.
He also says something else here. He says also that he is not reactive to issues of anti-Semitism. He says, I don't play that game.
Yeah, right.
So,
It's hard to hear. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because that's what he perceives the diaspora is all about.
Right, exactly.
Right.
That we're just a reaction to that kind of stuff.
Well, so it's interesting that you say that the perception of what the diaspora is all about, because a little bit that's what where I feel like I'm poking at a lot. It's like, do you know, it's that there are certain kinds of stereotypes that exist about what, there's responsibility to think about, Israel educated think it's not, if it strikes me as wrong that the kind of categories live as stereotypes, what they mean, without actually digging a little bit deeper in terms of what, I don't know, there are like lots of Jews who live in places in diaspora, and there's lots of stuff going on there. And that feels like a very easy kind of dismissal, but it's important to note that it's classic Zionist ideology. It's like it's a very big deal. I say this only as an example of one kind of relationship between Israel and diaspora, and this kind of relationship is kind of as I have models on the second page. I'm reminding is on the last set of sources. I just want to come back to it. In the middle of the page, there are models of Jewish peoplehood. That's called Shlilat HaGolah. That's basically the classic Zionist term Shlilat HaGolah, rejecting the diaspora, and Ben Gurion believed that, and Abi Yoshua is another example, and you can go through Zionist history, and you have lots of people who think that that's true. It is striking, if you go back to page 1, that there was a very famous, on the first page, debate, exchange between Ben Gurion and Jacob Blaustein, which is reflective of the different kind of relationship. And part of what I want to do over the next couple of minutes is just to point to the ways in which the relationship has been and can be formulated and shaped in different kinds of ways. With Abi Yoshua's understanding of the relationship being one, Jacob Blaustein was, this is 1950, and Charles Liebman wrote an article about the exchange between Ben-Gurion and Jacob Blaustein. Ben-Gurion came to the United States in order to make a pitch for Aliyah. And he was basically pushing for American Jews. We need Jews to come to Israel in order to fill out the country. They have to come. Jacob Blaustein, as I heard Judah Kurtzer describe it at the time, it's like at the time, if Ben-Gurion wanted to be in contact with the President of the United States of America, he called Jacob Blaustein, who was the head of the American Jewish Committee, and he paved the way. And it's just by, just in terms of thinking about the difference of Israel in 2015 and Israel in 1950, if the prime minister of the 2-year-old state wanted to speak to the president, he called the head of the AJC to make that connection. That's like a kind of a striking type of image, which is why the following exchange could happen. Ben-Gurion comes to push people to make Aliyah, and Jacob Blaustein, who's obviously an enormous supporter of the state of Israel, says, no, you cannot push for Aliyah from here, because we're going to support. And I want you to think of it not in terms of it, like the history of it as its own thing, but what does it mean in terms of kind of the relationship between Israel and diaspora in 1950 from this American kind of side. We're not this either, right? But just we want to think about it. Read how Ben-Gurion, Jacob Blaustein pushed Ben-Gurion and said, you gotta withdraw. You have to withdraw. You cannot make a call for Aliyah. So Ben-Gurion made the following statement, which is a reaction. He said, this is a reaction. This is not, he was forced to say this. The Jews of the United States as a community and as individuals, I'm on the top of the first page, have only one political attachment, and that is to the United States of America. They owe no political allegiance to Israel. The state of Israel represents and speaks only on behalf of its own citizens, and in no way presumes to represent or speak in the name of Jews who are citizens of any other country.
I can't believe he said this.
You can't believe it, right? It's unbelievable, right? You didn't believe it. Let me say a word about immigration. We should like to see American Jews come and take part in our effort, but the decision as to whether they wish to come permanently or temporarily rests with the free discretion of each American Jew himself. Chalutzim have come to us, and we believe more will come, not only from those countries where the Jews are oppressed and in exile, but also from countries where the Jews live a life of freedom and are equal in status to all other citizens of their country. And Blaustein put out a statement in response to the Ben-Gurion thing, where he writes, while Israel has naturally placed some burdens on Jews elsewhere, particularly in America, let's read that again. While Israel has naturally placed some burdens on Jews elsewhere, particularly in America, it has in turn meant much to Jews throughout the world. For hundreds of thousands in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, it has provided a home in which they can attain their full stature of human dignity for the first time.
Everywhere except the United States.
Yes. Harm has been done to the morale and to some extent to the sense of security of the American Jewish community through unwise and unwarranted statements and appeals which ignore the feelings and aspirations of American Jewry. You know what they were afraid of, obviously, Blaustein? If Jews started moving to Israel and responding to the Zionist push, basically what would that mean for American Jews? They would be accused of having dual loyalties and therefore not real Americans. Then that whole cycle that everybody has been traumatized for all Jewish history is going to come back. Now, again, for the purposes of understanding the way the relationship, like what's the relationship between diaspora and Israel when you look at the Ben-Gurion, like in 1950, Ben-Gurion and Jacob Blaustein kind of thing. What is it like? How do you shape that relationship?
Paternalistic.
Yes, it's like a very parent-like, right? It's like we're the providers, we're providing you, we're getting you the money, we're getting you the political clout, we're getting whatever you need, so you'll do what we say do. You'll behave yourself, right? Exactly. So I point this only in order to allow us kind of to loosen the bonds of how to imagine the relationship. So you can imagine the relationship in different kinds. It hasn't always been the same. It's actually been different. It takes shape, and we shouldn't kind of just take it for granted. Just like, well, it is what it is. It isn't what it is. It is. It changes based on the way that we think about it. And I find it very strong. I feel very connected to the one on the top of page 2, which is a different way of perceiving the relationship. And this I mentioned last time, Shimon Ravidovich is also writing in the 1950s, and he is not he's neither of these. He's not a Shlilat HaGolah person, and he's not the diaspora is kind of the parent of of the state of Israel, which obviously we'll all acknowledge is an outdated, I mean, that maybe once was in some sense, but isn't now. But he's writing, even in that time, this is how he sees it. He says, regarding a connection, is there, say one more thing. I'm reminding you, this is from a letter, which I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that Rabbi David wrote to Ben Gurion about the declaration, about the name of the new state. And we take, I enjoy very much when there are things that we take for granted because they just appear as facts, but there's like a whole backstory to everything. There's nothing that's just a fact, right? Everything's, happens through a lot of. So the decision, I don't know if you ever imagine it, but I love the idea of imagining people sitting around a table and saying, okay, what should we call it? Right? What would be the possible options of what to call this country? And the decision, right? Is that right? So yeah, you can think Zion is good, Zion is good, Palestine makes right. That you don't like that one.
Nah.
Sorry. But whether it was, the word Medina was a big. Also, it's a question as we mentioned last time. Amlacha, Medina, Nimshala, like those are all kind of different things. And when he settled on Yisrael, so Medinat Yisrael. What does Medinat Yisrael mean? Actually,
State of Israel.
The state of
Israel.
Yeah, what is Israel? So Rabbi David took.
What Ben Gurion meant was all the people.
That's what Rabbi David took issue with. He says you can't just call it Israel. That's like that you're taking too much when you're calling it Israel. So he wrote, regarding a connection, is there any means more suitable to maintain a connection between groups of a dispersed people, a state and a diaspora, than a shared name? Ben Gurion concludes his first letter as follows: we are all Jews, but only the citizens of the Jewish state are Israel. Now think of the implication, what that means then. And I actually wonder what you think about it, in terms of like the peoplehood thing. I mean, well, I don't know. What do you think about it?
He says we can't.
I mean, it's true. It's kind of like, yes, that's true. The state, there's a state of Israel, and then there are people. He says, well, what do you think about it?
We've got to go.
Do you like the formulation? This is Ben Gurion saying, we are all Jews, only the citizens of the Jewish state are Israel. He says, I do not accept this decision, which excludes the 10 million souls of the diasporas, and myself among them, from the totality of Israel. So I understand the semantic part of it. But what do you think he's really... it's an interesting machlok. It's important machlokas. It's like, if you're establishing a state, what does that mean for the people?
Where does Simon Rabinowitz live?
At this point, he lives he's in Brandeis. He's the first year studies department head of Brandeis. He came from Eastern Europe. He was a very strong Zionist, was very disappointed to not receive an appointment in Hebrew University, and then came to America, to Brandeis, and then he died pretty young. So that's where he is now. But he is a strong Hebraist, Yiddishist, Zionist person, but he's living in America.
I think there's an underlying argument going back to Alfred Yeshua's comments about, nationality versus religion, that's sort of underlying this debate as well, which is that what is it that we're naming here? And what Ben Gurion is claiming, I think, is that the nation of Israel is identical. He's trying to establish an identity between nationhood and statehood.
Yeah.
And that's what the diaspora is objecting to.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. Well, the diaspora, let's take the first part first. What Ben Gurion clearly argues for is that the nation and the state, that's Israel. What I want to make sure that we're clear, and it's what I think is very important to what all these contemporary writers have been highlighting, trying to dig out, is that connection between the nation and the state is certainly a possible formulation, a very powerful formulation, both in terms of what it accomplishes, but also what it closes out, which is that all the people living outside of Israel are not part of the nation. They might be part of the religion, but they're not part of the nation. Now, you can argue that in two ways. Again, 1885 Reformed Jewry said, you're right, that's why I'm here. It is a religion, it's only private, and I'm an American. The question is whether there's something else, which is I'm living here and I'm a Zionist and I'm part of the nation, and I don't think it's just a religion, and the state is there, but the Jewish nation actually exists all over. And so I want to, again, for distinguishing kinds of purposes, right? If you look at the models that are on the next, in the middle of the page, the Shlilat HaGolah classic Zionist idea understands that the nation and the state are Israel, and everything outside is not. The diasporists are people who say, like, I'm not interested in the state. The Jewish nation shouldn't have a state. And that can range from Reform Jews to Zionist diaspora Jews that live today, to Satmar Hasidim, to different kinds of people who are just diasporists.
Not Israeli.
And not Israeli, right? Not Israeli, and certainly even in Israel, you're not an Israeli.
Right.
But in America also, I'm not kind of looking for even that. I mean, it takes different. Yeah, okay, leave it at that. I think what I want, like, what the fight is, or at least to me, what's interesting, what I find my own internal wrestling with is with options 2 and 3. Because option 2 is the one that I think that I was raised on, and option 3 is the one that I think I'm wrestling with more. Option 2 is the idea of a center and periphery, which basically means, of course, there are lots of thriving communities outside of Israel, but we all know that the center is Israel, and that's where we're supposed to be, and that we're not quite there, etc. And I kind of a side of me doesn't want to lose that. I think that that's right. I hope that my kids, some are going to end up, moving to Israel, and we'll see what happens when I retire. Like all that, like that's. But what bothers me tremendously when I find myself struggling with is that the fact that there are like real people here who are thriving and living lives and contributing to Jewish culture and have done so for 2,000 years, and it's very hard for me to I have a hard time kind of dismissing that. And so the idea of Rabidovich's 2 centers in a values-based kind of way I find very fascinating, both in terms of last week's discussion, which is a political theory discussion that says living as a minority and living as a sovereign provide binocular vision in terms of what it means to live ethically with power, and that's compelling. And then this last thing, this I try to do in kind of this week, but I'll try to do it in the last 5 minutes, is that it comes to like peoplehood. What would it mean for the Jewish nation, for us to think of ourselves as Jewish nation in a 2 centers kind of way? So if you look at page 3, there is an organization that's called the Jewish People Policy Institute in Israel, and it was started by the guy Avinoam Bar Yosef, and it's a kind of a think tank which presents to the Prime Minister's office each year. I'm on top page 3. They have the name Jewish People Policy Institute. Is significant, and that's an Israeli organization that is interested in thinking about the Jewish people and what the Israeli government and the state of Israel's responsibility is in terms of thinking about the Jewish people at large. Yehuda Mirsky is kind of a member of that think tank, and so he wrote an article, the title of which is on the top, called Peoplehood Thin and Strong. And I want to just point to these 3 things: education, religious policy, and funding. If Judaism, I'm not reading yet, but if Judaism was actually, if the Jewish people, if it was a nation with 2 centers, so what would Jewish education look like in terms of what people in Israel learn about and what people in the diaspora learn about in school?
So the people in Israel will learn more about the diaspora.
People in Israel don't learn anything about the
They
diaspora.
learn English, but not because they're.
It would be okay to be in that.
Yes, but not because.
Well, they might be tempted to come to the diaspora because
Just
whatever
to
things they
visit.
see, but they're not learning about the diaspora. So there's a certain kind of asymmetry that I find like really interesting, right? We all know it in our gut, but I feel like it's taken me like decades to kind of feel like I can look at it and say, oh, it's like, well, what's with that? What's with it that our responsibility in the diaspora is to teach Israel, and this I don't think. I mean, I'm not making me any less of a Zionist. What does it mean that we teach about Israel and our obligations teach about Israel, but there's no suggestion there should be an obligation to learn about the diaspora.
It's a center periphery model, first of all, and
It's
the
a
diaspora's point.
it's at best a center. In this regards, maybe it's a center periphery model, or a Shlilat HaGolah model. So here's what I want to point is that aside from like political views and how whether you support, you go AIPAC or J Street, whatever, all those things, in terms of what it means to be a diaspora Jew. Here's like something else. It's like. What about education? What about Jews being a nation? So education plays out in a certain kind of way. So here is how he writes. Israel education has in one form or another been a staple of Jewish educational programs for decades. Formal and informal, frontal and experiential, text-based and multimedia, everything in between. By contrast, formal diaspora education exists in Israel in only the most limited forms, if at all. While elements of Jewish history are taught in Israel's highly centralized system, contemporary Jewish life outside of Israel is dealt with negligibly by religious and secular streams alike. This reflects the classical Zionist conception in which the Jewish state is properly not only the center of Jewish life, but in fact supersedes the diaspora as the historical bearer of Jewish civilization, peoplehood, and for religious Zionism, spiritual and religious authority. Does that paragraph right? Yeah. So the idea of two centers versus center periphery versus Shlilat HaGolah has implications in things like this. Like, to the Jewish communities, if we one nation with two centers, our obligation would be to get to know each other better in lots of ways. That's an example. Does that make sense?
Elements of Jewish history, though, would cover diaspora just a long time ago, right?
Yeah, they do. I mean, because you can't.
Contemporary diaspora is what's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't deny. Yes, I mean, I don't think you can deny that there's some Jewish history that's
covers
learned.
whole diaspora.
Yeah, right. And I don't know it intimately. I'm just kind of.
And they're not calling it diaspora; they're calling it history, right?
I think they'd say the galut or the golah,
Right,
something like that.
But they look at it differently.
Yeah, because it is. It's a shlilat. It's the kind of the aberration. Yes.
So that will very much, I think, play into that crisis narrative of Zionism. If Jewish history and the Golah, like, was kind of bad, and then all of a sudden there's Israel.
Yes, right. I mean, I think that the messianic version feeds into that too. I think that if for a different reason or less extreme, less severely, but it ends up in the same kind. It's not so important to know it if we're just kind of moving past it. And I think the two centers idea is trying to is pushing for something which is different. Yes.
I keep thinking of this Israeli child, in the 50s. He went to America for a little bit and came back, and he said, "Selo kol kach ra b'golah."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I understand also, right? Right? The idea is not to entice people to move out. Right? That's not, or as you'll say, they're going anyway. But it is, I do find myself pining for like a relationship that feels a little bit different. Like, what about religious policy? You mentioned it. Like, it doesn't strike anybody as funny that there's a rabbinate in Israel that decides whether conversions in America are okay or not.
It doesn't strike me.
I'm sorry. I'm being too tongue-in-cheek. Yes, but you're right. But that's the structure. There's no. Why is it a strange thing? What would be odd about imagining there's a Jewish people, so there's a representative rabbinic body from Jewish communities across the world? Now, I fully understand the Zionist like how that came to be. Like, it makes sense to me that too.
The people who are making that decision are not particularly Zionists.
Yeah. Okay. Right. That's okay. That's a discussion of its own, right?
Right.
So I want to. Right. I kind of give the nod to that, but So what would it? What what's striking? Like, what's important is that when you talk about like the alienation, like what's happening to American Jews in terms of their connection to Israel, I think that the things that are very difficult. Meaning, orthodoxy is right-leaning and therefore supportive, and they're good. And as you keep, not to stereotype a little bit unfairly, but as you keep moving leftward, there's increasing alienation amongst, adults and certainly students, right? What are the issues that generate that? So, certain rabbinic policies and treatment of the other are basically the two categories that cause people's alienation, right? That's exactly how do you treat the Palestinians? How do you treat the secular Jews? There's no pluralism. What happens with conversion? All of those kinds of things. Now, I'm not a big, fan of. It's not like I think that the pluralism is the ideal. I'm just saying in reality, there are lots of different kinds of Jews who are being alienated by that. And there's no, having some kind of shared discourse and shared structure would actually make a difference. In order to do that, that requires some kind of assumption that there are two centers that are both have some validity, enough at least to be able to interact with each other and to work together to solve problems. And lastly, I would just point to the funding thing, which has started to change a little bit. But if you think about it, right, we all know it feels a little bit dated to say, well, what is America good for, for Jews? For the money. So it's like, okay, there's still money, but it's not exactly what it was in the 1950s, and that's changed.
The U.S. government.
And yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
if there were no American Jews, if all the American Jews went to Israel, there'd be no money.
So here, but that line, are you disagreeing? Or when you shake your head?
If all the Jews would be there, the economy there would be much stronger, and maybe we wouldn't need that money.
They have tech millionaires there too.
Who would have
Yeah.
paid for the dome?
There are many wealthy people that they don't give charity in Israel.
Yeah, but we Americans, not Jewish Americans, the $1.8 billion a year that the
But
IDF
that's
gets is for the
pressure
government
because
of
of
America.
American Jews.
Yes.
The voting
Correct.
power,
Yes.
voting rights of American Jews is what created that payment.
That's also.
I think the government has to answer.
More complicated.
Yes, that's a big right. That's a discussion, right? Also a discussion of its own. That's out of my I here just to be. I don't feel expert on that at all, and I'm not trying to. What I do, the part that I do feel like it's fair for me to raise is not about kind of the realities of the economy in Israel and America or anything like that. But I do think that there are ideas and perceptions and some religiously based ideas, stuff like that, that shape the orientations and dispositions people have to these kinds of issues. And to the degree to which that's true, like whether you take a crisis narrative or a messianic narrative or a values-based narrative, those narratives shape the ways in which we think about education across the board, religion across the board, the funding, those things. And to the degree to which that's true, I feel like, I feel entitled to be able to weigh in. I'm just going to read the last paragraph and I'll call it a day. Today, Israel has developed a healthy economy. The diaspora contributions are more of an expression of peoplehood than a critical need, right? I think that feels right. The Jewish People Policy Institute has developed a new project called New Paradigm for the Israeli government, recommending that it take a greater responsibility for the Jewish identity of the next generations. Do you think funding should go in both directions? In other words, does the Israeli government have responsibility for Jewish communities outside of Israel from a financial perspective? It's starting to happen. I mean, but it's a beginning, right? And there's been more talk about it, and that's I want to connect those events with with these ideas. I mean, it's connected to these people, the Jewish people. That's happening. I mean, I think the Jewish People Policy Institute takes some credit for some of that happening. Since the establishment of the Jewish state, the Jews around the globe have contributed significantly to Israel's physical and social development. Today, Israel can afford to invest in Jewish education abroad and has a responsibility to do so. This is understood today by the Israeli government, by the Jewish Agency for Israel, chaired by Natan Sharansky, by many Israelis who recognize that the diaspora is also a strategic asset for them. Okay, I'm going to just sum up, and I left the last page. I'm just not going to do it. We ran out of time. So the one paragraph sum up, as far as I'm concerned, is basically that the argument is that they're positive, so that there's the diaspora is a multi-sided experience, and as Ruth Weiss called at the beginning, a great experiment of the Jewish people that has actually been inspiration to societies, communities around the world of how a diaspora can actually survive. Even in the instance of when there was a state, those two centers actually lived side by side. While today the idea of thinking in two centers is not a very common one, it was one that had some voice before the state was established, and I find a very interesting one to at least keep in our heads as we kind of read the stuff that's going on around us. So thanks for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.